All right, let's unpack this. Just imagine one of the world's biggest economies, right, the second largest, makes this huge announcement. They're completely removing all tariffs on exports from an entire continent.
Yeah.
That's what China has just put on the table for Africa. And it sounds like this massive invitation, doesn't it?
It really does.
Wide open access to, well, an enormous market, especially when, other big players might be pulling back, putting up tariffs. It feels like a major shift.
What's fascinating here, though, isn't just the headline. It's more about how Africa is going to respond, because sure, it sounds like a breakthrough, a really significant one. But the key question, the one we need to dig into, is this. Will African nations just keep, sending raw materials? Or is this access, this sort of unprecedented access, going to be used to actually industrialize, to process goods, export things with higher value? It's a really pivotal moment.
Yeah.
We have to look past the initial announcement.
Right. So that's our mission in this deep dive, to really get a handle on what this zero tariff policy from China actually means for Africa. Is it going to spark real, transformative change, or is it just going to be more of the same, kind of echoing missed chances from the past, maybe like you or Wei?
Yeah, that's a good point.
This isn't just about trade numbers, is it? It feels bigger. It's about a shifting world order, maybe, and where Africa decides to position itself. And look, this deep dive, it's designed specifically for you listening right now. We want to equip you with a solid understanding, maybe some surprising facts too, help you get informed quickly on what's happening at this really crucial moment in global economics. So let's get into the specifics of this bombshell announcement. Beijing removes all taxes, all duties on African exports. How big of an opportunity is that, really? And what about the engagement, that trade expo you mentioned?
Oh, it's immense. I mean, we're talking access to China's $17 trillion market. Removing tariffs, that's a major cost barrier, just gone. And the engagement, well, it's definitely buzzing. Just before this news broke, China held its fourth China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo. Get this, 4,700 companies, over 30,000 people attending.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the scale of the invitation itself, that's undeniable. It's huge.
Okay, huge scale, massive engagement. But there's usually some fine print, isn't there? This isn't the very first time China's offered tariff breaks, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's important to get the nuance here. China has actually, over the last few years, rolled out similar zero tariff things for least developed countries.
Yeah.
But this latest announcement, this is the big step. It expands the offer significantly.
Yeah.
We're talking up to 53 out of the 54 African nations that have diplomatic ties with Beijing.
Okay.
Eswatine's the only exception. So while the idea isn't brand new, applying it across almost the entire continent is the major development here.
So the doors swing open, theoretically. But, and this is a question for you listening too, while those trade doors are open, what are the actual hurdles, the prerequisites? It's not just like waving a magic wand, is it?
Exactly. Zero tariffs does not mean zero problems. Not at all. To qualify, African goods still have to meet really strict Chinese standards. Packaging, labeling, quality, inspections.
Right.
And that alone, honestly, could knock out a lot of smaller producers. They just don't have the infrastructure, the systems to meet those benchmarks. Think about it like growing fantastic coffee beans isn't enough.
Yeah.
They need to be processed perfectly, bagged just right,
Yeah.
certified to a very specific standard. And many small farmers just aren't set up for that. And another key point, for now, this policy is mostly about physical goods, not services, not tech, not digital trade areas where Africa also has, a lot of potential. So yes, opportunities there, but the practical steps to actually grab it, that's still a pretty big challenge.
So when we talk China-Africa trade, the growth itself, the last couple of decades, it's just been explosive, right? Can you sort of paint that picture for us?
Oh, absolutely. Explosive is the right word. Trade volume just skyrocketed. Think less than 100 billion yuan back in 2000. Fast forward to 2024, it's 2.1 trillion yuan.
Wow.
That's an average growth rate of over 14% a year, every year, for 2 decades. The key thing here isn't just the growth, though. It signals this massive shift in global trade patterns. But historically, that flow has mostly been raw materials, not finished goods.
And if we drill down into what makes up that huge volume, what does that tell us about the relationship itself, the nature of it?
Well, if you break down the numbers, a very clear picture emerges, a stark one, actually. So in 2023, Africa exported about $109 billion worth of stuff to China. And the overwhelming majority of that, sometimes over 90% for specific countries, was raw materials.
90%.
Yeah, we're talking oil, gas, copper, cobalt, iron ore, cocoa beans, timber, coffee beans, you name it. Take Angola or Nigeria, heavily reliant on sending petroleum to China. Or the DRC, sending huge amounts of cobalt and copper.
Which China needs for its EV revolution, right?
Exactly. Powering China's green tech boom.
Yeah.
And even agricultural stuff like cashews or cocoa. It often leaves Africa just raw, unprocessed.
Okay, and then flip the coin. China's exports to Africa. What does that look like?
That was $173 billion last year. And it's mostly the opposite. Manufactured products. Machinery, electronics, cars, textiles, steel, chemicals.
So Africa sends the raw ingredients out, and
Right.
China sends back the finished cake, basically.
Precisely. And that creates what economists often call an extraction economy dynamic. Africa provides the raw inputs, China processes them, makes the finished goods, and captures most of the profit, the value add. And the cycle, frankly, has kept Africa sort of stuck at the bottom of the global value chain for decades.
Right.
Because when you only control the raw stuff, but not the processing, the packaging, the branding, the final sale,
Yeah.
you're not getting the real value. Which means these tariff cuts, well, they could just end up speeding up that same old pattern. Cheap resources flowing out, expensive finished goods flowing back in, reinforcing the status quo, not changing it.
That whole extraction economy thing, it really rings a bell. It sounds worryingly familiar, because we've seen something like this before, haven't we? Africa had duty-free access to the U.S. market for, what, over 20 years under ODOA?
That's right, the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
And despite that huge window, the continent, well, it barely made a dent, really. Didn't really transform its economies in the way people hoped.
Yeah.
It's a pretty stark reminder, isn't it, about the risk of letting another big opportunity like this just slip away.
And that kind of brings us to the why. Why is China doing this now? Look, these actions aren't just, pure charity. It's definitely part of a bigger strategy, a long-term play. For the last 20 years, China has been systematically building the backbone of African economies, massive infrastructure projects.
Right, the roads, the railways.
Exactly. Roads, railways, ports, power stations, telecom towers, even digital networks. Think about Kenya's standard gauge railway. That started running back in 2017. That's a prime example. And these often fall under China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, launched in 2013. Now, something like 3 out of 4 African countries have signed memorandums of understanding with China on BRI projects.
It does make you pause and think, though. If China is financing these projects, building them, sometimes even operating these networks, does dropping tariffs really benefit Africa most? Or is it almost like vertical integration, but on someone else's land, ensuring China controls the flow?
That's a really critical question.
Yeah.
And this tariff offer, it's not happening in isolation, right? It comes at a time when, the U.S. might be seen as pulling back a bit globally, even imposing tariffs elsewhere. The EU is dealing with its own internal stuff. So China steps in and positions itself as Africa's, quote, most reliable partner, offering these win-win deals, often framed as having no political strings attached.
But no political strings attached. I mean, that always sounds a bit too neat, doesn't it? Especially for a global superpower. Is it truly no strings? Or are there maybe more subtle expectations, geopolitical ones perhaps, that come with this level of investment and partnership?
Well, it's crucial to see the bigger picture. China needs Africa too. It's not a one-way street. It needs African oil, minerals, all those raw materials to keep its huge industries running.
Sure.
It needs African markets for its own manufactured goods, especially as its domestic economy matures. And this is important. It needs African political support on the world stage, at the UN, the WTO, within groups like BRICS. So maybe there aren't explicit strings like demanding certain political reforms like some Western partners might, but it's definitely not just trade for trade's sake. It's a major geopolitical investment for Beijing. Building influence, securing resources, securing allies.
So through things like education programs, media partnerships, and now these big trade incentives, China is really boosting its soft power across Africa. And this zero tariff deal, it sends a powerful message, doesn't it? Like, hey, we're the ones opening doors while the West is putting up walls.
Exactly. And for many African leaders, that message lands very effectively. It resonates.
Okay, so if Africa wants to really grab this opportunity, what does that transformative vision actually look like? I mean, imagine if Nigeria wasn't just exporting raw rubber, but finished tires, industrial parts.
Right.
Or if Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire weren't just shipping out cocoa beans, but selling beautiful high-end chocolate bars on shelves in Shanghai or Beijing. That feels like the real game changer.
Absolutely. The economic impact of that kind of value addition, it would be huge, tremendous. Just think, if Africa could process even, say, 20 or 30% of its current $109 billion in raw exports into value-added goods. That could add maybe $20 to $30 billion annually in value kept on the continent across cocoa, rubber, oil, metals, textiles.
That's serious money.
It is. And it's not just marginal growth. It creates this powerful economic multiplier effect. You generate local industry jobs, you build skills, you foster innovation. It leads to genuinely transformative growth that ripples through the economy. That's the shift that could unlock entirely new industries, create millions of jobs, and build lasting wealth in Africa.
Okay, so the opportunity is massive. The stakes are incredibly high. It all boils down to, how can Africa actually seize this moment? What are the concrete steps, the actionable things that need to happen?
Right. Well, we can break it down into maybe 6 key strategies, a kind of new strategic response for Africa. First, and this is critical, Africa has to add value. It just can't be the world's supplier of raw stuff anymore. The continent needs to become the factory, the lab, the processing hub for its own resources.
So making the chocolate in Ghana.
Exactly. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire investing seriously in local cocoa processing, chocolate making. Nigeria developing petrochemicals, refining its own oil. Zambia, DRC turning their cobalt and copper into battery components locally. That's number 1. Second, Africa needs to build a processing infrastructure and do it fast. Governments need to step up, create special economic zones, invest heavily in reliable power that's huge, and fix the logistical nightmares that bottlenecks at ports and in transport. And private sector leaders, diaspora investors, they should be asking themselves, okay, what industries can I build here to capture this value we've been exporting?
Makes sense. What's third?
Third, diversify beyond just commodities. Africa's future isn't only in mining and oil, right? There's massive potential in agro-processing, textiles, green energy components, tech, services. Look at Rwanda. They're already exporting processed coffee under their own brands. Ethiopia's made real strides in textile manufacturing, supplying big global names. That needs to scale up across the continent.
Okay, value add, infrastructure, diversification, what else?
Fourth, empower the small producers and farmers. Because zero tariffs won't mean much if only the big corporations benefit. Governments have to actively support the small guys, the cooperatives, the local entrepreneurs. They are the real engine of most African economies.
How? What kind of support?
Things like training, helping them get certifications, setting up quality control systems, access to finance, digital tools so they can connect to markets. Actually, that lack of strong support for small players was one of the big reasons EDUI didn't deliver as much as it could have for many.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, number 5.
Fifth, African governments need to negotiate smarter. It's time to move past just accepting deals without a really clear strategy for national benefit. This is the moment to push for partnerships that explicitly encourage local processing, that mandate knowledge transfer, that protect new nascent industries from being swamped immediately. And critically, making sure Chinese investment, or any investment, doesn't just displace local businesses and workers. And using the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the huge agreement aiming for a single market, use that as leverage. Negotiate as a unified bloc, not as 50-something separate, weaker voices.
That seems crucial. Unity and negotiation. And the last one, number 6.
Finally, number 6 is maybe more fundamental. It's about shifting the mindset from just being a supplier to thinking about sovereignty, economic sovereignty. This is bigger than just trade deals. It's about Africa redefining how it sees itself.
Yeah.
Not just as a source of cheap inputs for the rest of the world, but as a shaper of global value in its own right. Africa has the resources for the 21st century. Now it needs to build the industries, the talent, the institutions to make itself indispensable on its own terms. So summing it all up, the core thing to understand is this. China's opened the door. The tariffs are gone. The opportunity, it's definitely real.
Yeah.
But the actual value Africa gets from this, so that depends entirely, 100%, on how Africa responds. This is much bigger than just a trade policy tweak. It really is about Africa's future role in a rapidly changing world order, which raises an important question.
It absolutely does. And it leaves us with a really powerful thought, doesn't it? This moment right now, it could genuinely be a turning point for Africa, a real one. Or it could just end up being another chapter in that long, familiar story of missed opportunities, of continued external dependency.
Yeah.
This is Africa's chance, maybe its best chance in a generation, to rise, not just talking about it, but actually rising in terms of revenue reinvestment, real, tangible transformation. But that only happens if the continent starts exporting with real intention, building with a clear vision, and frankly, refusing to let history just repeat itself. The real win, as you put it, that comes when Africa starts to dominate parts of the value chain, not just feed the bottom rungs.
Exactly.
And that critical shift, that won't be hunted down from Beijing, or from Washington for that matter. It has to come from within Africa. From Accra, from Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Lagos, Kinshasa, from you, from me, from everyone invested in the continent's future. Something really important for all of us to think about. What does this pivotal moment truly mean for Africa's path forward and for how we all understand the shifting dynamics of our world?